Isn't it frustrating when you're working on a software product and it almost feels like management is trying to make the project fail? Well, stay tuned because today I'm going to share 9 things that your CEO, product manager, or project manager absolutely has to understand about software development to have a healthy tech culture. Hi, I'm Jamie, and at Healthy Software Developer, I want to help you stay calm, keep growing, and have a great balance between your career and your life. One of the most frustrating things for software developers is when you're on a project and it almost feels like the management has never built a software product before. They ask you to do things that seem to fly in the face of what many of us programmers know is really good or best practice in the industry. So today I'm going to share some tips with you that you can share with your leadership or just circulate amongst developers to help you all understand some of the things that I think many CEOs, product managers, and project managers simply don't really think clearly about, and this causes them to make decisions that don't really make sense to the engineering team. Hey, if you're new here, consider subscribing. I publish new videos every Tuesday and Friday. The first thing that I think is really important for your leadership to understand is that programmers produce output at different rates. When the company that you're working for puts a request out to hire someone, they often list a whole bunch of technologies that they've worked with, and they look at it like if we bring someone in with the right experience that's this exact stack of technologies we're using, we can then expect them, after working with the team for a little while, to all produce output at about the same rate. And in my experience, this just isn't true. Some of the most frustrating software projects I've came in as a consultant to help rescue have been those projects where the leadership's expecting everybody to work at the same rate. And because they just can't do that, everything ends up being late and everybody feels frustrated and forced to work the same way. And so we should think about at a software company, if we're going to have a healthy culture, how can we set up the way that people work together to embrace that and not penalize it and pretend that it's actually a reality? The second thing that I think is really important for your leadership to understand is that nagging people for status doesn't actually force them to get work done faster. When you go to school, there's a report card many of us have sent back to our parents, and it's sent maybe twice a semester or something like that. And if you do poorly on a set of tests or maybe in a class, you might have a teacher that has you then bring home a daily report card or some sort of status report as a way to make sure that because you made a mistake or maybe you weren't living up to their performance expectations, your parents can understand that you're still doing a good job and you're making sure you get your work done. But I don't think many leaders of software companies understand that when you take a student out of college who's able to basically work on a project in their course, let's say they took a course on programming, they might work on a project for a couple weeks or maybe a month before they deliver that project to their professor. And during that time, it's not like their professor's asking them every single day, hey, what did you do yesterday? What did you do yesterday? And so when you put a software developer on a project and you put them on a Scrum team or a Kanban team and you try to hold a daily Scrum or daily stand-up meeting, and I talked about this in a previous video, asking that developer to basically give status to management every single day is really insulting. It's actually making them feel like you don't trust them to actually get work done unless you're constantly nagging them. So I think you just need to think about, if you're working in a software company and that's the kind of culture that's in place, it's really going to create a mood amongst engineering that they're going to feel frustrated, not trusted, and like they're being micromanaged. And it doesn't matter if you go out and read any Scrum guide or bring in an Agile coach and they try to tell you that this is a best practice. The daily Scrum or status meetings are really meant for developers to communicate daily. And if you as a manager can ask for status less frequently, like once per week, once per month, or once per release, It's going to really free up the ability for developers to just get stuff done with less pressure on them and let them self-organize to build the software the best way possible. And it's also going to prevent you, if you're in a leadership position, from wasting your time trying to get updates from developers when there's not really much that you can do about things changing from day to day. The third thing your leadership really needs to understand, if they're going to have a healthy tech culture when working with other engineers, is that somebody being late on one task is not going to make the whole project late. When a group of software developers, maybe they're on a Scrum team, maybe they're on a Kanban team, is working on that list of tasks and trying to complete them within some fixed duration, let's say it's a 2-week sprint or something like that. You may have some tasks that get done twice as fast as they were estimated and some that take 3 times longer. And if every day the leadership or the management is checking up on developers, and the moment one task starts to take a little bit longer than it was estimated, everybody freaks out and spends a whole bunch of time getting into a room with that developer and trying to grill them and understand, why are you late and what did you find out that's different? You're really just wasting that developer's time. You're not actually going to help them produce things faster by taking a whole bunch of time to understand the complexity that they've already discovered. The better thing to do is just give that developer the time that they're going to need to get it done anyway. If they get to a point where they realize it's going to take, let's say, 4 times longer than the original estimate, hopefully they're going to communicate that to you. But if you don't trust your developers enough to actually bring up issues about the project to you ahead of time, you're really creating an environment where people are going to feel insulted. And there's definitely a stereotype, right, for programmers that we all just sit in cubes and write code and kind of can't interact with the rest of the business. And really, if your leadership is treating developers like that, like they need to be checked up on every day, because if the moment a task goes late, they don't have the maturity to actually talk to somebody and try to get some help, you're really just perpetuating that stereotype and causing developers to act exactly the way that you don't want them to. The fourth thing that I think programmers really wish that leadership at companies understood is that changing the scope of work because you're doing an Agile type of software project actually has extra costs associated with it. One of the promises of Agile software development is that it allows the company, the business, to change direction more often than traditional waterfall types of projects where you would plan everything up front and a development team would just build it for 1 year to 2 years with no changes. But when software developers work in an Agile fashion, because they're asked to change things more frequently, it's really difficult just to build, let's say, a form on a web page to do one thing correctly when it has a whole bunch of rules and data and validations set up behind it. And if the business decides to change the way that form's going to work substantially, developers are happy to do that, but it's often then going to be more complicated. Because if they knew about that up front, they could have designed that form and all of the code behind it, which is usually a lot more sophisticated and complicated than managers understand, to support all the requirements. Now that they have to support different requirements, it's not as simple as just going in and changing something small. Oftentimes, it requires practically rewriting the entire feature of the application to meet the new requirements. So if you're on a software team that's using Agile development methods, Scrum, Kanban, or any one of the other variants that surround it, just know that by having that extra agility, it does come with a cost that when you change direction, it's actually going to be more expensive than had you known exactly what you were going to build up front. The fifth thing I think many developers and engineers wish that their management really understood is that programmers actually can save the most time at a company by being creative. If you think about software development and how complicated it is and why software developers and engineers and UX personnel are paid so much, it's because there's often many ways to implement the same feature. You could take 5 developers and ask them to build the exact same small thing, and their approach to build it is going to be wildly different. And it has nothing to do with how good of a developer they are, they're just different people. And a solution one developer comes up with to solve a problem might take them much longer than another developer. And the only way most software developers come up with the fastest way or best way to implement a feature is if they're able to think about it a little bit and have a little bit of time and apply the most creative solution. And that brings me to the 6th thing that I think many programmers and engineers really wish their management understood, and that's that programmers need to be very well rested to be creative. If developers are working 50, 60-hour weeks and they're constantly sitting at their computer and they never get a break, they're not going to have the clear head that it takes to really think through whatever they're building and really exercise various different options in their mind and maybe talk about it amongst their colleagues before they begin coding it so that they actually start down the path of the best solution that's going to take the least time to implement and that's going to hopefully be the most maintainable for the overall product. The temptation is strong, especially in startups, to press software developers to produce output as fast as possible. I mean, it's not cheap to employ programmers. Everybody knows that. But it's really important that leadership that choose to get into the software industry, they understand that your developers are one of your biggest assets. They're a strategic asset that you can use to help you break into new markets and help you compete. And if you burn out your best developers because you're constantly pushing them to get things done as quickly as possible, they're not going to be able to provide that creativity that you really need at your company to actually leapfrog your competition and keep competing as the market's changing all the time. The 7th thing that I think most programmers and engineers really wish their CEO, product manager, or project managers understood about them is that they are actually really good at identifying really valuable new features for the customers of the products they're building. It's very common that when an engineer comes straight out of college, the company can look at that person as though they've never worked for a software company before. They don't understand everything about the company. And so therefore, all we can trust them to do is to produce code and learn from the engineering side of the organization. But many tech products these days are built for a commercial market or for a specific segment that's used to using technology. And usually college students can be the absolute best people that are in better touch with what customers expect in today's market with technology than people that have been working at a software company for 5, 10, 20 years. So if you're working at a software company and you're a programmer, or you're maybe somebody who's leading a group of programmers and you don't allow software developers or engineers to actually contribute ideas to the software product, you're really missing out on the ability to come up with ideas that people who are more kind of entrenched in the existing organization, they're familiar with the traditional way that the product's been built, are going to miss. And it's sometimes those new radically different ideas that really make your product remarkable and stick out in the market and that are ultimately going to cause the most profit for your software products. The 7th thing that I think engineers really wish leadership understood is that if you force them to hit deadlines, no matter what, they're going to have to cut corners. And I've been on way too many projects in my career where the company is so focused on hitting their deadlines that they don't really realize that just by marching towards those deadlines at all costs, they're forcing a ton of pressure on engineers that's going to cause them to have to not implement the best practices that they know are going to keep the product secure. So there's no leaks, for example, in the media and things like that of people's accounts. I mean, you've seen what's happened to some companies when security holes happen. This is usually because developers don't have the time to think through those things. And on an Agile software project where you're changing the product all the time, writing the code in a quick and dirty way to just get it out the door versus thinking about it a little bit and making it maintainable so that as the product grows and gets more and more and more features, the way the code's written, it can adapt to those changes and not turn into basically a mess like spaghetti code you've heard of is really important. And the only way that's going to happen is if the company allows developers, when they get into a situation where they realize, I can get this feature done, we're still going to build this, but we're going to miss our deadline, for the leadership to learn to reset expectations with their customer or their manager and help them understand that as an organization, they're committed to quality. And so if something's going to take longer, that's more important to their company that the product's built properly than that they hit that arbitrary deadline and potentially release a buggy or insecure product. And the ninth thing that engineers, including myself, really hope that the leadership understands at a software company is that if programmers are forced to do nothing but code all day, they will lose touch with the business. When I've been at software companies and there's immense pressure to hit deadlines or constantly just be producing features, and that's all that software developers are ever asked to do, they lose sight of why are we building the product that we are? What's the value actually for the customer? What are some of our customers' problems? What are some things that we need to, as engineers, do to make sure that the product stays stable? And they just start to fend for themselves because they're basically in a panic state all the time. They don't help each other very well, and they start to stop cooperating and focus only on hitting whatever they're on the hook for at all costs. And I've talked about in other videos how to run an engineering organization and have a group of software developers building a product, whether you're a startup or an enterprise, developers need to be doing things other than just producing new features. They need to be cleaning up original code that was maybe built the right way to suit the requirements at that time, but has grown out of control as the products change. And that's just going to take time. That's technical debt, right? You've heard of that before. They also need to have time to help review each other's code. They need to have time to keep track of the latest technology trends to make sure that the software product isn't falling too far behind in its market, where you're going to get into a situation where finding new talent to maintain the product becomes really difficult. So I just would encourage you, if you're a software developer out there or if you're in leadership, that whatever you can do to help developers not spend all day sitting on the computer and instead get them off the computer, have them meet maybe with customers, have them sit in on planning meetings with the business if they're interested and help them understand a little bit more about the product. Have them take a break and walk in some nature and rejuvenate their minds so they're more productive. That's really going to help everybody enjoy software development more, have a healthy and sustainable culture, and not just get into a situation that I've just seen way too many times where it becomes basically a death spiral or a death march, and the project's ultimately doomed to fail because developers are not motivated anymore, they're being micromanaged, and nobody really loves their job or cares about working on the product anymore except to just get a paycheck. So does your CEO, product manager, or project manager know these things about software development? I'm sure you do if you're a programmer out there, but I think sometimes I would take for granted that the leadership at the company I'm working at really understands these kind of somewhat fundamental things about software development. So if you're working under leadership and you think they may not know this, go ahead and share this video with them, or maybe take some notes and let them know the important points that you think would help them run the company better. Hey, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. I publish new videos every Tuesday and Friday. And if you'd rather listen to these as a podcast, you can search for Healthy Software Developer on Google Play, Stitcher, iTunes, or SoundCloud. So until next time, thanks.